They saw an easy mark, a pregnant woman, alone and vulnerable. What they didn't see was the storm gathering just 2 blocks away. Her husband was coming, and he was Mike Tyson. The afternoon sun cast a golden, lazy glow over Artisans Row, a polished gem set in the heart of Brooklyn. It was a place that smelled of money and ambition, where old brick warehouses had been reborn as art galleries, third-wave coffee shops, and exclusive boutiques. The air hummed with a curated calm, the gentle clinking of porcelain cups, the murmur of conversations about stock portfolios and gallery openings, the soft whir of electric bikes gliding past. Mothers in designer activewear pushed state-of-the-art strollers, and artists with paint-splattered jeans debated philosophy over artisanal kombucha. It was a bubble of sophisticated safety, a world away from the city's harder edges. But a bubble is, by its nature, fragile. Inside, the gilded crust, a bakery known for its sourdough and eye-watering prices, Laura Tyson stood waiting. At 8 months pregnant, she was a vision of serene beauty, her form draped in a flowing, emerald-green maternity dress that highlighted the warm tones of her skin. A delicate gold chain rested on her collarbone. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant but simple knot, and her hand rested instinctively, protectively, on the swell of her belly. She was picking up a small indulgence, a box of raspberry macarons and a decaf oat milk latte. The young barista, a girl with a constellation of silver rings on her fingers, smiled warmly. "You're absolutely glowing, Mrs. Tyson." Laura returned the smile, a genuine, easy expression. "Thank you, Chloe. I think that's just the sugar talking. This little one has decided he needs a steady supply." As she spoke, she was oblivious to the vehicle crawling down the street outside. A matte black utility van, its windows tinted to an impenetrable darkness, moved with a predatory slowness that was jarringly out of place amidst the Teslas and Range Rovers. It had no logos, no markings, nothing to identify it. From within its shadowy interior, 4 pairs of eyes scanned the well-heeled crowd, searching. Silas, the grin, Vance adjusted the designer sunglasses perched on his nose, his gaze sweeping past a man in a tailored suit and a woman dripping with diamonds before it settled, with chilling finality, on Laura. A thin, cruel smile stretched his lips, the feature that had earned him his moniker. It never reached his eyes. "There," he murmured, his voice a low rasp. "Her. The bag is a Birkin. The necklace is real. She's alone." Beside him, his crew, the self-styled jackals, shifted in anticipation. They were a new breed of predator, specializing in the wealthy, insulated neighborhoods where people forgot to be afraid. Their method was brutally efficient: overwhelm, intimidate, and vanish before anyone could even process what had happened. They weren't just thieves, they fed on the shock and violation. They were about to make the gravest miscalculation of their criminal careers. Laura stepped out of the bakery, the crisp paper bag in one hand, her warm latte in the other. The sunlight made her squint for a moment. She pulled out her phone, a quick smile touching her lips as a text message appeared on the screen. "Mike, just found parking. Be there in 5. Don't eat all the macarons without me." She typed a quick reply, her thumb flying across the screen. "No promises." She started walking toward the corner, a small, private smile on her face as she thought of her husband. She didn't get more than 10 paces. The black van swerved abruptly, its tires letting out a sharp squeal as it mounted the curb, cutting off her path. The side door slid open with a heavy, menacing thud, and 3 figures spilled out, their faces obscured by dark bandanas, their hands gloved. A 4th, a wiry woman with eyes that glittered with a manic energy, positioned herself behind Laura, completing the trap. "That's a beautiful purse," the woman, Zia, hissed, her voice laced with a mocking sweetness. "I bet the wallet inside is even prettier." Laura froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. The warmth of the afternoon vanished, replaced by a sudden, icy dread. Another jackal, a mountain of a man named Rocco, snatched the latte from her hand and contemptuously tossed it aside. The cup burst on the pavement, the pale brown liquid splattering across the pristine sidewalk like a splash of dirty water. "Let's not make this a scene," Rocco growled, his voice a low rumble of intimidation. Lara's free hand flew to her belly, a primal, protective gesture. Her voice was a strained whisper. "Please. I'm pregnant." Silas himself stepped out of the van now, moving with an unhurried, arrogant grace. He took off his sunglasses, revealing eyes as cold and empty as a winter sky. "We can see that," he said, his grin widening. "So don't do anything stupid. Just give us the bag and the jewelry, and you can go back to your perfect little life." Lara's mind raced, searching for an escape that wasn't there. "My husband, he's on his way. He's just the big guy we saw circling for a parking spot." Silas interrupted with a dismissive chuckle. "Don't worry. He's a few blocks away. This will be over long before he gets here." He gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod to Rocco. The big man lunged. That's when Lara screamed. It wasn't just a cry for help. It was a raw, piercing sound of pure terror, a sound that sliced through the peaceful afternoon air like a shard of broken glass. 2 blocks away, Mike Tyson was walking with the purposeful stride of a man on a mission. In one hand, he carried a small, vibrant bouquet of sunflowers, Lara's favorite. He was humming softly to himself, a tune only he could hear, a rare moment of unguarded peace on his face. He was 55 years old, a legend whose ferocity was the stuff of myths, but in this moment, he was just a husband on his way to meet his wife. His phone buzzed in his pocket with her reply, but he ignored it, knowing he'd see her in a minute. Then he heard it. The scream. It wasn't just any scream. He knew her voice. He knew its every inflection, every laugh, every whisper. And he knew the sound of her fear. It hit him like a physical blow, a jolt of ice and fire that shot straight through his soul. The world narrowed, the gentle sounds of the city fading into a dull roar. There was only that one sound. The sunflowers dropped from his hand, scattering their bright yellow petals across the gray pavement. He didn't run. He exploded. He moved with a speed that defied his age, his powerful legs churning, covering the ground with an earth-devouring gait. He wasn't a man jogging, he was a force of nature unleashed, a storm rolling in. The people on the sidewalk saw a blur of muscle and determination, their eyes widening as the famous face, now a mask of cold fury, flashed past them. Back on Artisans Row, the jackals were closing in. Rocco's hand was just inches from Lara's purse strap. Zia was reaching for the gold chain around her neck. Lara was pressed back against the cold brick wall of the bakery, her eyes wide with terror, her breath coming in ragged gasps. They never saw him coming. One moment, they were in control, masters of their chosen victim's fear. The next, a shadow fell over them, and the world erupted. Tyson didn't shout a warning. He didn't ask a question. He was the answer. Rocco, the largest of the group, was his first target. Tyson's approach was a masterclass in brutal economy. He didn't break stride. A devastating right hook, thrown with the full, terrifying force of his body, connected with Rocco's jaw. The sound was not a crack, but a sickening, wet thud, like a sledgehammer hitting a side of beef. Rocco's eyes rolled back in his head. He was unconscious before his 250-pound frame even began to fall, collapsing like a demolished building. The other 2 men turned, their expressions of arrogant confidence melting into disbelief. One of them, a lanky thug named Marco, swung a fist wildly. Tyson ducked under the clumsy punch with the fluid grace of his prime, his head bobbing in the iconic peekaboo style. He came up inside Marco's guard and delivered 2 piston-like body blows, left, right, so fast they sounded like a single, deep drumbeat. The air rushed out of Marco's lungs in a choked gasp. He doubled over, clutching his ribs, his face a mask of agony. A follow-up uppercut snapped his head back, and he crumpled to the ground, out cold. 30 seconds. That's all it had been. Zia, the woman, stared in horror, momentarily paralyzed. Then, her nerve broke. She shrieked and fumbled in her jacket, pulling out a can of pepper spray. She aimed it, her hand trembling. Tyson saw the movement. He took one long stride forward, his left hand shooting out to clamp around her wrist, his grip like a vice. He squeezed. The canister dropped from her numb fingers. He didn't hit her. He simply shoved her backward. She stumbled, tripped over her own feet, and landed hard on the pavement, sobbing in a mixture of pain and terror. The fourth man, the getaway driver who had stayed by the van, saw it all. He saw a legend dismantle his crew in less time than it takes to tie a shoe. He didn't hesitate. He scrambled back into the driver's seat, slammed the van into gear, and peeled away from the curb, leaving his fallen comrades behind without a second glance. The entire street was frozen in a stunned silence. Phones were out, recording, but no one spoke. They had just witnessed a myth come to life. Tyson's fury evaporated as quickly as it had appeared. The storm was gone. He turned to Lara, his expression softening instantly, the hard lines of his face melting away into pure, unadulterated concern. He gently took her by the shoulders, his hand surprisingly tender. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" "The baby?" he asked, his voice low and rumbling, a stark contrast to the violent silence he had just created. Lara shook her head, her eyes wide and still shimmering with the last vestiges of fear, but now also with overwhelming relief. She leaned into him, burying her face in his chest. "I'm okay," she whispered, her voice muffled by his shirt. "We're okay. You came." He wrapped his powerful arms around her, holding her close, his own heart still pounding. He looked down at the human wreckage at his feet, his eyes hardening for a brief moment, before looking back at the gathering crowd and the approaching wail of sirens. He had protected his own. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this wasn't over. The storm of violence on Artisans Row lasted less than a minute, but the digital shockwave it created was instantaneous and global. Before the first police cruiser had even arrived, shaky cell phone videos were already hitting the internet. The footage was raw, chaotic, and utterly electrifying. It showed a pregnant woman cornered, a gang of thugs moving in, and then, a legend erupting from the edge of the frame. Within an hour, #Tyson Unleashed was the #1 trending topic on Twitter. News outlets, hungry for a viral story, slapped sensational headlines onto the clips: Iron Mike saves pregnant wife in Brooklyn brawl. And thugs picked the wrong woman, meet the wrong husband. The videos racked up millions of views, each share and comment adding to the growing mythos. The world wasn't just watching a fight, they were watching the resurrection of an icon, a primal force in an over-civilized world. But not everyone was cheering. In a grimy, oil-stained garage on the industrial outskirts of the city, Silas Vance watched the same footage on a cracked tablet. The low-resolution video played on a loop, his crew, his hand-picked jackals, being dismantled with contemptuous ease. Rocco's jaw snapping back. Marco folding like a cheap suit. Zia being pushed aside like a child. He watched his driver flee in terror. Each replay was a fresh wave of acid washing over his ego. The grin was gone, replaced by a tight, white-lipped snarl. A silver-capped incisor glinted in the dim light every time his jaw clenched, which was often. "They're calling him a hero," his second-in-command, a gaunt man named Hector, muttered from the shadows. "Saying he took out 4 of ours in 30 seconds. He took out 3, Silas growled, his voice dangerously low. "And 1 ran. Because they are cowards. Because they were weak." He wasn't just angry. He was profoundly, personally humiliated. His reputation was built on fear, on the illusion of untouchable control. In half a minute, Mike Tyson had shattered that illusion for the entire world to see. With a roar of pure rage, Silas hurled the tablet across the garage. It smashed against a brick wall, shattering into a spiderweb of glass and plastic. He stood up, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. "No one," he seethed, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "No one does this to me. No one makes the jackals a laughingstock." He stopped and turned to Hector, his eyes burning with a cold fire. "This isn't about a failed score anymore. This is about respect. I want his name tarnished. I want him to feel fear. I want him to know that legends can bleed." Meanwhile, at the Tyson residence, a modern, fortified home in a quiet, wealthy suburb, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. A private doctor had already visited, confirming that Lara and the baby were physically unharmed. But the psychological trauma lingered. Lara sat on the sofa, a cup of chamomile tea untouched in her hands, her eyes distant. Tyson stood by the large, panoramic window, arms folded across his massive chest, staring out into the darkness. He had seen that look in her eyes before, the look of someone who has had their sense of safety stolen. It ignited a slow, burning rage deep within him, a rage far more dangerous than the explosive anger he'd shown earlier. Later that evening, Trent Malloy let himself in through the back. A retired NYPD detective with a face like a roadmap of tough cases, Trent was one of Tyson's oldest and most trusted friends. He was carrying a slim file. "This was more than just a random mugging, Mike," Trent said, skipping the pleasantries. He laid the file on the coffee table. It contained profiles of Silas Vance and his crew. "These jackals aren't your typical street thugs. They're connected. Black market arms, ties to some very unpleasant people. Silas Vance is smart, vindictive, and he thinks he's untouchable." Tyson's gaze didn't flicker from the window. "Let him think that." Trent sighed, running a hand over his tired face. "That's the problem. He's not just going to let this go. An arrest for assault won't stick if Lara doesn't testify, and I wouldn't put her through that. But for guys like Silas, public humiliation is worse than a prison sentence. He will retaliate. It's not a matter of if, but when and how." "I'm counting on it," Tyson said, his voice a low growl. The proof of Trent's warning came the very next morning. Tyson drove Lara to a follow-up checkup himself, his eyes constantly scanning every car that passed, every person on the street a potential threat. When they returned to their vehicle in the hospital's multi-story parking garage, he stopped dead. The front right tire was slashed, the rubber gaping open. A deep, jagged scratch ran the length of the driver's side door, gouged into the expensive paintwork. And etched into the metal, crude but unmistakable, was a message. "Legends fall." Tyson's jaw tightened. He slowly scanned the quiet, concrete levels of the garage. It was empty, but he could feel them. He could feel their eyes on him, watching from the shadows. This was the opening move in a new, far more dangerous game. The war had just come home. Returning home, Tyson transformed the house from a sanctuary into a fortress. The quiet hum of domestic life was replaced by the low thrum of a fortress preparing for a siege. He moved with a grim, focused intensity, a man reverting to a primal state of vigilance. He personally checked every lock, reinforced the deadbolts, and activated the full perimeter security system, motion sensors, infrared cameras, pressure plates near the windows. The sprawling, elegant house suddenly felt like a cage, albeit a gilded one. Lara watched him, her heart aching with a mixture of fear and love. She tried to maintain a facade of calm for him, for the baby, but the tension was a living thing in the house, coiling in the corners of every room. That evening, as she watched him check the camera feeds on a monitor for the 10th time, she finally voiced the fear that had been strangling her. "What if they come here, Mike?" she whispered, her hand resting on her stomach. He turned from the screen, his face softening as he looked at her. He walked over and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "They won't get past the gate," he said, his voice a low, reassuring rumble. But in the deepest part of his soul, the part that had been forged in the crucible of the ring and the harshness of the streets, he knew they would try. And he knew it would be soon. As dusk bled across the sky, painting the horizon in shades of bruised purple and orange, his instincts were proven right. A low, guttural roar echoed from the distance, growing steadily louder. It was the sound of high-performance engines, a sound that didn't belong on the quiet, tree-lined private road leading to their home. Tyson looked at the monitor. Four black sports motorcycles, ridden by figures clad in dark leather, were racing up the driveway. Behind them, moving at a more deliberate pace, was the same matte black SUV that had haunted his thoughts since the day before. The siege had begun. Inside the SUV, Silas Vance sat in the passenger seat, his face a cold, impassive mask. He wasn't here for a simple smash and grab. He was here to dismantle a legend, piece by piece, in his own home. He had brought his best, for enforcers who were more like mercenaries than street thugs, men who fought for money and the thrill of violence. This wasn't a robbery, it was an execution. Tyson watched the convoy approach on the screen. He didn't panic. He didn't call the police. This was his war. He turned to Lara. Go to the panic room. Lock the door. Do not open it for any reason until I come for you. Do you understand? She saw the look in his eyes, not of fear, but of absolute, terrifying resolve. She nodded, kissed him quickly, and hurried down the hall. Tyson cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing in the silent house. He walked to the heavy oak front door, unlocked it, and stepped out onto the wide, stone porch. He stood there, bathed in the warm glow of the porch light, waiting. The motorcycles screeched to a halt in a semicircle at the base of the steps. The riders dismounted in unison. They were bigger, more imposing than the crew from the day before. Their leather vests were emblazoned with the snarling head of a jackal. They were armed with steel pipes and heavy chains. The SUV door opened, and Silas stepped out. He walked slowly toward the porch, his steel-capped tooth glinting. He stopped just beyond the reach of the light, a smirk playing on his lips. "Well, well," Silas called out, his voice dripping with theatrical mockery. "The big man himself. Come out to greet your guests." Tyson stood motionless, a granite statue of a man. "You've made a mistake coming here." Silas chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "No. Your mistake was putting your hands on my people. Now, we're going to teach you a lesson about overstepping." "They attacked a pregnant woman," Tyson stated, his voice flat and cold. "They were doing their job," Silas retorted. "A job you interrupted." Tyson's eyes darkened. "Then you're sicker than they are." Silas gave a subtle, almost invisible flick of his hand. The four bikers surged forward, fanning out to attack from all sides. What followed was not a fight. It was a demolition. The first biker swung a heavy chain in a whistling arc aimed at Tyson's head. Tyson didn't retreat. He moved forward, into the attack, his arm coming up to block the chain with his forearm. The impact would have shattered a normal man's bone. Tyson barely flinched. He grabbed the chain, yanked the man off balance, and delivered a single, brutal elbow strike to his temple. The biker collapsed, his limbs twitching. The second rushed him from the side with a steel pipe. Tyson sidestepped the clumsy swing with an agility that was mesmerizing. He spun, his body a whirlwind of controlled power, and a roundhouse kick, thrown with the full force of his hips, slammed into the man's ribs with a sickening crunch. The pipe clattered to the ground as the man fell, screaming. A third tried to tackle him from behind, to wrap him up. It was a fatal error. Tyson planted his feet, dropped his center of gravity, and used the man's own momentum to flip him over his shoulder. The biker landed hard on the stone steps with a cry of agony. Before he could even try to rise, Tyson brought a heavy boot down on his ankle. A sharp snap echoed in the night air. The fourth, seeing his comrades fall, hesitated for a split second. That was all Tyson needed. He closed the distance in 2 long strides and unleashed a furious combination, a jab that snapped the man's head back, a right cross that staggered him, and a final, devastating left hook that lifted him off his feet and sent him sprawling onto the manicured lawn, unconscious. Silas stared, his smirk finally gone, replaced by a flicker of disbelief. 4 of his best men, down in under a minute. Tyson stepped down from the porch, his breathing even, his gaze locked on Silas. "No goons left," he said, his voice a low growl. "You want this to end? You do it yourself." A flicker of primal fear crossed Silas's face, but it was quickly masked by rage. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a long, gleaming hunting knife. "You're past your prime, old man," he spat. "I've seen your fights. You're slow now. You're just a name." Tyson didn't even blink. "Try me." Silas lunged, the knife a silver blur. Tyson moved with him, a dancer in a deadly ballet. He parried the first thrust with his forearm, the blade slicing through his jacket sleeve but not his skin. He absorbed the momentum, spun inside Silas's guard, and struck with a knife hand chop to the collarbone. Silas grunted in pain but swung again, a wild, desperate slash. Tyson caught his wrist. With a single, fluid motion, he twisted the arm, forcing the knife from Silas's numb fingers. He continued the motion, bending the arm back at an unnatural angle. A loud, sickening pop echoed through the night as Silas's shoulder dislocated. The gang leader dropped to his knees, a raw, agonized scream tearing from his throat. The distant wail of sirens grew louder. Tyson stood over the writhing form of Silas Vance, his chest heaving slightly, the only sign of his exertion. "Stay down," Tyson commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Because if you get up, I will end you." The police arrived minutes later to a scene of carnage. 4 men incapacitated, another screaming on the ground, and one legend standing tall, the undisputed king of his castle. From the window, Lara watched, relief washing over her in a powerful wave. The war was over. And her husband had won. The night of the siege didn't just end a fight, it ended an era for the city's underworld. The name, Jackals, once whispered with a mixture of fear and envy, became a punchline. Hospitals across the 5 boroughs quietly treated a sudden influx of men with broken bones, shattered jaws, and dislocated shoulders, all telling frantic, disjointed stories about a monster in a suburban home. Silas, the Grin Vance, was in surgery for 7 hours, his shoulder reconstructed with pins and plates, his jaw wired shut, his ego permanently annihilated. The only words he managed to rasp to the detectives at his bedside before being sedated were, "He's not human." The next morning, the media frenzy was a hurricane. Drones from news channels hovered over the Tyson property like metallic vultures. The headlines were even more sensational than before: "Legend defends home in midnight siege, Tyson takes down entire gang." Again, real-life action hero, is Mike Tyson the toughest man alive? Inside the house, however, the world was quiet. Lara sat in a sun-drenched armchair in the living room, sipping ginger tea, her hand resting on her belly, a soft smile on her face. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound sense of security. Tyson stood by the window, watching the media circus through the drawn blinds, his expression unreadable. "You're trending again," Lara said softly, a hint of amusement in her voice. #Tyson Effect. "I didn't do it for them," he muttered, his gaze fixed on a news van parked down the road. "I know," she replied, her voice full of love. "You did it for us." Just then, Trent Malloy arrived, slipping in through a back entrance to avoid the press. He was holding a burner phone and looked more exhausted than ever. "It's done, Mike," Trent said, a note of awe in his voice. "I've been listening to chatter on the encrypted channels. The Jackals are finished. They've scattered. But it's bigger than that. What you didn't just stop one crew. You sent a message to every single gang in this city. You've made them all think twice. You've made them afraid." Tyson turned from the window, a new, cold resolve in his eyes. "Good. Then it's time to make it permanent." Later that day, a video appeared. It wasn't released to the news or on social media. It was uploaded directly to the dark web, seeded onto the encrypted forums and private chat channels where the city's criminal element communicated. The video was stark. The quality was grainy, shot in black and white. It showed Mike Tyson, alone, standing in what looked like an empty warehouse or a gym. He wore a simple black hoodie, his face partially shadowed. He stared directly into the camera lens, his gaze so intense it felt like he could see through the screen, into the soul of whoever was watching. When he spoke, his voice was not loud, but it carried an impossible weight. It was low, steady, and every word was a hammer blow. "I hear you talk in the shadows," he began. "I hear you whisper about territory, about respect, about strength." He took a slow step closer to the camera, his face filling more of the frame. "You put your hands on my wife. My pregnant wife. You came to my home, to the place where my family sleeps. You thought you could take what was mine. You thought my name was just a memory. You thought I was soft." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. "This is not a warning. Warnings are for people who have a choice. You had your choice. This is a promise." His eyes seemed to burn with a cold, internal fire. "I don't care what crew you claim. I don't care what colors you wear. I don't care how many of you there are. If I ever hear a whisper that you have looked at my family, thought about my family, or even spoken my family's name, I will not call the police. I will not wait for you to make a move." He was inches from the lens now, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. "I will find you. And I will erase your name from the streets so completely that even your own shadows won't remember where you stood." The feed cut to black. The silence that followed in the digital underworld was deafening. Across the city, hardened men who had built empires on fear and violence watched the video on their phones and laptops. Deals were cancelled. Feuds were dropped. Plans were abandoned. A new, unspoken rule was established on the streets of New York. Some called it paranoia. Others called it survival. But everyone agreed on one thing: you don't mess with Mike Tyson's family. The legend hadn't just returned, he had become the new law. A week after the proclamation video sent a tremor of fear through the city's underworld, a different kind of silence fell over the Tyson household, one of peace. Laura gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby boy. They named him Kai. The news wasn't released to the public for days, by which time the family was already safely back home. During their brief hospital stay, the administration had, at Trent's quiet suggestion, tripled their security detail. But the truth was, it wasn't necessary. The city's criminal population wouldn't have gone near that hospital for all the money in the world. Tyson never left Lara's side. He sat by her bed, his massive hand gently wrapped around hers, his eyes rarely leaving her or the small, perfect bundle in the bassinet beside her. The warrior was gone, replaced completely by the husband and father. When they returned home, Tyson carried Kai, cradled carefully in his powerful arms, as Lara walked beside him, leaning on him for support. The house no longer felt like a fortress, but a home once more, filled with a quiet joy that was more powerful than any security system. In the weeks that followed, a strange calm settled over their part of the city. Crime rates in their borough, and several neighboring ones, saw a statistically significant drop. The Tyson Effect, as the tabloids had dubbed it, was real. Cops on the beat joked about it. Politicians made light of it in speeches, suggesting they should put Tyson's face on neighborhood watch signs with the caption, "Try it and see what happens." Tyson never acknowledged the jokes or the articles. He didn't grant interviews. He didn't issue statements. His actions had spoken for him, and now he was done talking. His world had shrunk to the beautiful, simple reality of his family. He took walks with Lara, pushing Kai in a stroller through the quiet suburban streets, his presence a silent, unspoken dare to the world to disturb his peace. No one did. One sunny afternoon, about a month after it all began, they found themselves back on Artisan's Row. They stopped by the Gilded Crust to thank the young barista, Chloe, who had given a clear statement to the police. As Laura cooed at the baby, Chloe looked at Tyson, her eyes wide with a kind of reverent awe. "You really are a superhero, aren't you?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. Tyson looked away from the girl, his gaze falling on Laura, who was smiling down at their son. He watched as Kai's tiny hand wrapped around her finger. A soft, genuine smile touched Tyson's own lips, a smile of pure contentment that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. He looked back at Chloe, the legend, the myth, the monster, all of it stripped away, leaving only the man. "No," he said, his voice soft and warm. "Just a father." But legends have a way of living on, their echoes shaping the world long after the storm has passed. And in the dark corners of the city, when new cowards and new bullies think of stepping out of line, they will be told the story of the day a gang of thugs made the dumbest decision of their lives. They will be reminded that she wasn't just another woman. She was Tyson's wife. And some lines, you just don't cross. What do you think drives a man like Tyson? Fury, or love? Share your thoughts below, and always comment with respect. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that hit hard.